Here's a lightly polished version, same structure, length, and every detail, names, numbers, quotes, preserved, with just word-level refinements for flow. My name is Elizabeth Bellamy and I'm 25 years old. The morning of the most important day of my life. I woke up at 5 a.m. and couldn't drift back to sleep. My Yale School of Medicine interview was 14 hours away. I had spent 3 years building toward that single moment. The late nights in the library, the volunteer shifts at the free clinic, the MCAT retake I'd paid for myself by working double shifts at a diner. Everything I had was riding on that interview, and I knew it. I lay in the dark of my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, running through every question they might ask me, rehearsing my answers under my breath like a prayer. I owned one blazer, one good one, a charcoal gray wool blend jacket I'd bought secondhand from a consignment shop 2 towns over, pressed and perfect, hanging on the back of my closet door like a piece of armor. I'd had it dry cleaned the week before. I tried it on 4 times just to be sure it still fit right. That blazer was the most professional thing I owned, and I'd been guarding it like it was made of gold. My sister Vanessa was 22, still living at home, and had never once in her life been happy about anything I achieved. Every acceptance letter I received, every scholarship, every good grade, she met with silence or sarcasm or some small cruelty she could pass off as a joke. We hadn't been close since childhood, but I'd learned to keep my distance and my mouth shut. I thought distance was enough. I was wrong. I found out what she'd done at 7:30 that morning. I walked into my room after breakfast and immediately caught the smell. Sharp, chemical, wrong. The blazer was still on the hanger, but when I lifted it toward the light from the window, I saw the damage. Pale, uneven splotches spread across the left shoulder, the lapel, and down the front panel. Bleach. She had poured bleach on my blazer, not spilled, poured. There was no other explanation. The pattern was too deliberate, too thorough. Someone had stood in my room and destroyed the one thing I needed most on the one day I needed it most. My hands were shaking when I walked downstairs. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal, not even glancing up. My mother stood at the counter refilling her coffee. I held up the blazer and said, as calmly as I could manage, "Did you do this?" Vanessa shrugged and claimed she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at my mother. She looked at the blazer, then at me, and said, "Elizabeth, stop making a scene. It's just a jacket. You're being dramatic." My father walked in from the hallway, caught those last words, and didn't even ask what had happened. He just said, "Your mother's right. Don't start something before a big day." That was it. That was the full extent of their response to their daughter's blazer being ruined the night before the most critical interview of her life. Don't make a scene. Don't start something. As if I were the problem standing in that kitchen. I went back upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed holding that ruined jacket, and cried for exactly 10 minutes. I let myself feel all of it, the rage, the humiliation, the grief of realizing that the people meant to protect me had spent my whole life looking the other way while one of their children hurt the other. 10 minutes. Then I stopped. I pressed the blazer. I steamed it. I hung it back up and studied it hard. The bleach stains weren't going anywhere. The fibers were already altered. The gray had turned to pale, washed-out patches that looked almost marbled under the light. There was no hiding it. I could walk into that interview wearing something ruined, or I could not walk in at all. And not walking in was never going to be an option. I wore it. I put on my white blouse, my black trousers, my only pair of good heels, and I put on that stained, bleached, damaged blazer like it was the most deliberate choice I had ever made. Because by the time I buttoned it and looked in the mirror, I had decided it was. I drove 2 hours to New Haven alone. I walked into the admissions building alone. I sat in the waiting area with 7 other applicants, all in clean, pressed suits and expensive blazers, and I sat straight and still, refusing to apologize for what I was wearing with my eyes, my posture, or my expression. When they called my name and I walked into the interview room, the dean of admissions looked up from my file. His eyes moved to my blazer. He studied it for just a moment, then glanced down at my last name on the folder in front of him, and his expression shifted. The dean's name was Dr. Harold Whitfield, and he had run admissions at Yale School of Medicine for 19 years. I knew that because I had researched every person who might be sitting across from me in that room. I believed in preparation. I believed in knowing your audience. What I hadn't prepared for was the way he set my folder down slowly, leaned back in his chair, and said those 3 words like he was confirming something he'd already suspected. "Wait, you're her." I didn't flinch. I held his gaze and said, "That depends on who you're looking for, sir." He smiled. Not the polite, professional smile interviewers use to put candidates at ease, but a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. He turned my folder around and slid it across the table toward me, pointing to my name. Then he pulled a second document from a manila envelope beside his desk and set it next to my application. It was a letter of recognition from the American Medical Student Research Foundation. My research paper on healthcare access disparities in rural communities had won their National Undergraduate Award 8 months earlier. I had submitted it under my full name, Elizabeth Renee Bellamy. He had remembered the name. Dr. Whitfield had sat on the foundation's selection committee that year. He told me he'd argued for my paper in a room full of people who wanted something safer and more conventional. He said my work had a quality he rarely encountered in undergraduate submissions. It read like someone who had actually lived inside the problem she was writing about, not just studied it from a distance. He was right. I had grown up 40 minutes from the county with the lowest physician-to-patient ratio in the state. I knew exactly what I was writing about. We talked for 53 minutes. The interview was scheduled for 30. He asked about my research, about the free clinic, about why medicine and not public policy, about what kind of doctor I intended to become. I answered every question honestly and completely, without performance, without the rehearsed language I'd practiced at 5 o'clock that morning in the dark. About 20 minutes in, he nodded toward my blazer and said simply, "That took courage, walking in here today." I looked down at the bleach patches on my lapel and said, "It took something, sir." I'm not sure courage is the right word for wearing the only option you have left. He wrote something on his notepad. I didn't ask what. When I left that building and walked back to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had shifted during those 53 minutes, something I hadn't expected. I had walked in carrying humiliation and walked out carrying something else entirely. Not triumph, not yet. Just steadiness, the quiet kind that comes from realizing that what someone did to break you had ended up being the exact thing that made you visible. 6 weeks later, I received my acceptance letter from Yale School of Medicine, full merit scholarship. I was one of 93 students selected from over 4,000 applicants. I read the letter 3 times standing at my mailbox in the cold. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. My mother came downstairs first. I slid the letter across the table without a word. She read it, and her face did something complicated, something between pride and the particular shame of a person who knows she doesn't deserve to feel it. She said, "Elizabeth, I always knew you'd," and I said, "Please don't." Not unkindly. Just clearly. She stopped. My father read it next. He shook my hand. That was the most he had ever known how to give, and I accepted it for what it was and nothing more. Vanessa never said a word about the blazer. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, nothing. I didn't need it anymore. What she had meant as destruction had become the most recognizable thing about me in that interview room. The stains she'd poured onto my jacket had made me impossible to forget. She had tried to take something from me and had accidentally handed me the very detail that made a 19-year veteran of admissions remember my face. I kept the blazer. It hangs in my closet at my apartment in New Haven right now, 2 blocks from campus. I look at it sometimes before a hard day, before a difficult exam, before a clinical rotation I know will test me, before any moment I need to remember what I'm actually made of. I don't wear it anymore. I don't need to. It already did its job. Some people spend their whole lives trying to make you smaller. They pour bleach on your armor the night before your battle because they cannot stand the idea of watching you win. What they don't understand, what Vanessa never understood, what my parents still don't fully understand, is that the people who are meant to get somewhere will find a way to get there wearing whatever they have left. I walked into Yale with a ruined blazer and walked out with everything I had ever worked for. And I did it alone, the way I had always done everything that mattered. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week on this channel we bring you real stories of people who refuse to stay broken. You don't want to miss what's coming next.